Confessions of an Astrologer. Discover the inside secrets of an astrologer's life with John Wadsworth in conversation with Charly McCreary.
Welcome to Confessions of an Astrologer. I'm Charly McCreary and I'm really happy to be here with John Wadsworth. We're going to be having a series of conversations about his life and work as an astrologer, and this is our first episode. Really excited to be here with you, John.
Yeah, me too. Hi, Charly. Yeah, I'm really excited to be doing this too.
Likewise. And where are you based, John?
I'm in Glastonbury in the UK. Mystical Glastonbury, ancient site of ancient Avalon. Yeah, it's it all happens here. Yeah, this is a great place of pilgrimage and mystery and wonder. Yeah.
Wonderful. Well, I'm excited to dive into this series of conversations we'll be having. And today we're just going to focus on getting to know you a little bit more, your work, your history, how you came to be a professional astrologer, your journey to becoming that. And so I think we'll just dive in with that. So when did you first get connected with astrology? How old were you? What was that journey? Can you talk a little about that?
You can. It's a big story. And I was 21. I was in Spain. I was on holiday. I was traveling with my brother. I landed up in a quite a remote place on the Costa de la Luz in southern Spain. And I met a guy in a bar. This sounds like the start of a joke, doesn't it? But I met a guy in a bar.
It does.
and we hit up a conversation, and just as something I didn't know, he was known to friends of mine, but I just sat down and we had a drink and we started talking, and it was and we had this extraordinary conversation. And after half an hour, he looked me in the eye and he just said, "You're an Aries." And I'm like, "How do you know that?" And he said, "I don't know. I just know you're the same sign as me. And I just discovered astrology like last week. And there's just something about that we're like the same." And I'd been thinking the same, that there was this kind of mirroring going on between us. It was very odd. And I said, "Well, what does that mean? What does that even mean to be an Aries?" And he had this book about it. He's like, "I just got this book about it. Read it." And I started reading it, and it was like I was reading my own secret diary that I'd been writing, like unbeknown to myself. I'd been writing about my life, and here it was. And suddenly it was like, for the first time in my life, I had a sense of something meaningful. Like, this is extraordinary. This is who I am. But what made it extraordinary was that I wasn't really living that way. It was like being seen for the first time.
What was the book? What was the book, John? I'm sure everybody's going to be curious.
It was to be honest, it was some cheap book about Aries. You can pick them up on the shelf. It was just some little book that gave some insight into the sign. And that was enough to trip something off in my mind. And I went outside. We kind of just went our separate ways for evening. I went outside. It was a full moon. I looked up in the sky, and I was blown by what I just read, even though it was just, I'm blown by the fact that he could tell my sign. I was blown by what I'd read. I went outside. I looked up at the sky, and I had this kind of epiphany. And I spent an hour or two just under the sky, observing the heavens, noticing even how the stars moved. I never noticed how the stars moved in the sky. And I had this epiphany, and it was a realization that what was turning in the sky above me was also turning in me. And it was so profound that it changed my whole way of seeing the world. And I went kind of into an ecstatic state with this realization. And there was no real precedent for it. I'd never even thought about this before. And suddenly there was this, it was as if a key had been turned in my soul. And I clung on to this book. I remember that the tide had come up really high, and I was thinking about, wow, the full moon, the tide, because I'd thought about that before, and suddenly I was camping in the woods by the beach, and I had to get across the sea had come right up. I had to sort of swim part of the way to get to this place I've been camping that got cut off, and I was clutching this little book. It was crazy thing. And but on the back of this, I started having kind of visionary experiences, and I had one after the other, and they kind of increased in intensity over the following months. I mean, I did the chart, as you might imagine. I did the birth chart for this moment.
I was just going to ask that, and I was thinking about what's happening astrologically for everyone around the age 21, and it's
Right.
kind of that final Saturn square before the Saturn return. But I wondered if there are other things that were happening that were potentially.
Yeah.
You and I are both friends with Mark Jones, another UK-based astrologer, and he talks about turning points in our lives, these moments of illumination or change that suddenly illuminate a new path for us. So what was happening for you astrologically around this time?
Yeah, I mean, there was a lot. There was, as you say, there was the Saturn square and the Uranus square were both happening at that point. I had an important transit to my Sun Moon midpoint. I don't want to get too technical, but yeah, Sun Moon midpoint was being activated by Pluto. So those things kind of, because obviously when I started learning astrology off the back of that, you know, I saw these events first. But then it was when I got into secondary progressions about a year later that there's a very precise secondary progressed aspect in my chart that's extraordinary. And when I'm teaching my students progressions, I always show them this remarkable progression. Maybe we'll talk about it on another episode, because it really is a remarkable thing. But yeah, it was. I don't know, I'm interested in turning points too. And that's my, you know, and it's one of the things that I love working as an astrologer. It's one of the things that I kind of hold as a possibility that that the consultation itself might open up a gateway for people. And sometimes it does, you know, it's very exciting when it does. But I'm very interested, you know, in these moments in people's lives when there's a shift of the paradigm, when your perspective completely changes, or when you see something that you hadn't seen before about yourself, about the world. And I think an astrological experience can facilitate that. Yeah.
What a beautiful story, John. And I'm just reflecting on a few pieces from it. It was interesting that this stranger in a bar met you, chatted with you, and tuned into the Aries part of your chart. And I've seen your chart, and you have more than one thing in Aries, not just the sun. So this person could have been tuning into any number of things. And I feel like as an astrologer myself, I often get invited to guess people's sun signs. Is that something that you encounter? And do you believe in that? Or are you more on the thought pattern of the ascendant is kind of what we lead from? And I know you're not Aries ascendant, but what are your thoughts about that? How did this person tune into that strong Aries signature in your chart?
It's a very interesting thing. There's a couple of things I'll say about it. And one is that he thought he was a double Aries, because he had this book. I think he had I think it was the Rising Signs book he had by Sasha Fenton, or maybe it was actually in this book that he gave me as well. It could have been in there, but there was a very basic way of calculating your ascendant. You know, those things are often a little bit out, and he based it on this, and he figured that he was an Aries ascendant as well. And he looked at mine, and according to this very basic kind of way of working it out, he also saw that I had an Aries ascendant, right, according to this thing. Now, it actually turns out that we both have Pisces ascendant. So we're both Pisces ascendant, which I worked out when I did it properly. Obviously later I worked it out. But whatever he was seeing, you know, there was this recognition of being from the same kind of like totemic clan or something, you know, if you want to talk about it like that. But the interesting thing was that when I first got into it, I had this ability to just spot people's signs, sun signs. And I don't know how I did it, because I can't do it now. I'm hopeless at it. I've noticed this a lot with people when they first get inspired by astrology, particularly when it's, you know, when it really opens up for them. There's maybe it's beginner's luck, or there's some kind of serendipity that happens in those early stages that people can just guess sun signs. I've seen it a few times, but I don't know how I did it, to be honest. I didn't even have to ask anybody anything. I could just see it. But I was in this kind of heightened state for a while after discovering astrology, and I think it was part of that, you know. So yeah, something magical opened up. and I do believe that there is a magic in astrology that can open up a level of imagination. I'm very interested in imagination, and I'm very interested in how astrology can enhance imagination and what I would call the imaginal realm, that is there and accessible to us. And there are certain symbolic systems deep rooted in our collective imagination that can open that up, and I think astrology is one of those.
You were speaking about the imaginal realm, and I'm in agreement. It's a huge part of the practice of astrology, the art, the science, the metaphysics of it. And I know that your particular style of astrology that you've come to practice leans heavily into the archetypal realm,
right,
using these planetary archetypes through mythology. Can you talk a little bit about how you became an astrologer who emphasizes archetypes in your work? There are a lot of different types of astrologers for folks that don't know as much about the practice, and astrologers who work closely with archetypes, myth, story are one type of astrologer. So I'd love to hear a little more about how you discovered and what that process of unfolding and that connection to the archetypes, how that happened for you over these last 25 years of your work and your practice.
Yeah, it's a good question. Yeah. I mean, I got very interested in Jung quite early on. I would say probably, 3-4 years in, I mean, I started properly practicing. I think I did my first reading when I was about 24. So we're talking 1994, something like that. And I guess, I'd read, I don't know how many books I read in those first 2 years. I mean, I remember going to a bookshop once and I bought a pile so high of books. And there was like in the old days when we actually had proper bookshops, independent bookshops that sold astrology books. We have one or two still in Glastonbury, but there aren't many left of those. But I just raided this place and I bought everything I could find. And some of the books, of course, I was buying Howard Sporthouse, I was buying Liz Green, Melanie Reinhart. These were my early kind of inspirations. And of course, they introduced me to the world, to Jung and Jungian ideas, the idea of synchronicity, of course, which is such a key idea for us as astrologers. So yeah, I guess it was reading those people early on that really kind of inspired that. Because I taught myself, I went and did classes. I did a couple of courses. I ended up studying actually with the Huber School for 2 years in the mid 90s, but I'd already been practicing for a few years by the time I did that. And so I'd kind of got into the archetypes idea. Then I also worked with the subpersonalities, because the Huber School worked with psychosynthesis, which I know Mark is really into as well. And yeah, that was interesting. I ended up going back more to the Jungian approach afterwards. I didn't carry on working with the Huber system, although I thought it was very interesting. But yeah, I got really inspired by James Hillman, especially. And he's a big influence of mine, as I know he is of Liz Green's also. Yeah. But I love
mine too.
There's a wildness about Hillman that I love, because he lets the archetypes have their expression. He doesn't insist on so much on the integration. I mean, Jung was more into the wholeness and the mandala, which I also love as an idea, and I also have that as a primary idea in my work. But as you know, I also do astrodrama, which is the dramatic enactment of the birth chart, which I actually first discovered in the early 90s. And I ran my first astrodrama session in 94, I think, 94, 95, which was a big moment for me when I discovered that. And I realized that you could enable and you could allow the planets to speak for themselves. You could access a form of the archetype where the planet could come out in its own right, and that this could happen as through a kind of surrogacy, through people playing those planets. Even when people didn't really know very much astrology, there was a way of allowing that to come through, and that's been a big part of my work, and I'm still doing a lot of that work today. So that's I mean, I actually wrote my master's thesis on this topic in 2006. I did the master's degree in cultural astronomy and astrology, and my thesis was called "Embodied Astrology Towards an Embodied Astrology." Embodiment as a paradigm for astrological practice. So I was interested in this whole idea of what happens when we allow these archetypes to actually, when we allow ourselves to embody these archetypes, and the kind of, and it takes the astrology off the page, and it brings it into a living, live experience. And I think that also happens in consultations, potentially, that there is something that happens that is beyond the chart. There, you know, and something I've realized that often when you get these kind of revelatory moments or almost epiphanic moments that happen in sessions, something other has come in through the conversation that you're having, through an insight, through a deep insight. Something very wild and alive can happen. A turning point again. Yeah.
Beautiful. I'm excited to experience your astrodrama work someday, John. I'll have to come visit. I'm based in the US right now, but I have experienced it with other astrologers, and I loved what you were naming about how the chart really comes to life in that group dynamic. And I do think as consulting astrologers that when we get steeped in being in the field and really listening in a different way, not listening with our ears, but kind of listening with our hearts and our souls, suddenly the chart can really speak to us in beautiful and profound ways. And I sometimes have this experience in consultations, and I'd be interested to hear if you do as well. But sometimes we take a look at the chart in preparation for time with a client, and we think we have an idea of what wants to be spoken about in our time with our client. But sometimes in the moment when we really open that field and tune in and step into this embodied astrological practice with our clients, other things light up and say, wait, I want you to talk about me today, you know, that Mercury or that Venus or whatever it is in the chart. And I think that really listening to that and making space for that and inviting that creates really profound experiences in our client work. Can you talk a little about if you've had similar experiences?
I mean, when we talk about archetypes, it's, you know, I mean, what is an archetype? It's such a deep question, isn't it? I mean, Jung once said the archetypes are the gods, you know, the powers of the unconscious. You know, this is what were once spoken of as the gods. And of course, we're working with the gods, aren't we? You know, when we're working with the planets named for the gods. But you know, you could talk about an archetype as a function of the psyche. That's a more kind of modern psychological way of talking about an archetype, you know, a power and energy that has a particular form to it. I sometimes think of an archetype as a powerful, almost like a strange attractor around which certain images, ideas, and energies kind of constellate, but only particular ones. So the kinds of things that will constellate around Mars are very different to the things that will constellate around Venus. You know, there's something there. There's something that is, and it's common to all of us. You know, I mean these astrological ideas, to use a Platonic kind of approach, because we could also say, well, the archetypes are like the Platonic ideas in some way. They were archetypes also, but they carry a kind of efficacious power. And when we look at a chart, we are looking at a map. We're looking at but you know, when we're looking at how the planets in each sign are modified through their expression in the sign that they're in, through the house that they're in, the aspects, of course, all of that. You know, we're trying to synthesize a lot of information, but also each planet may, as an archetype, may also be trying to communicate something of its own nature as well. So I don't want to. I mean, I'm very wary of reducing a chart down and going, well, it means this chart, well, right now, that this planet in this sign means this, or this transit to this planet right now means that, and as if that is somehow a done deal. It's a living thing, and you have to be receptive, I think, as an astrologer, to what wants to be communicated, and that's something I'm really keen on. And so I try and resist any form of reductionism when it comes to interpreting a chart. For me, you can't take the astrologer out of the astrology. You kind of kill it if you do that. I mean, yeah, you can get your printouts of your meanings of all your places, but it's so incomplete as to be questionable as to its value. It can help, to get you in, because obviously you've got to, in order to learn astrology, you have to sort of go through to some extent the kind of cookbook, Mars in Aries means this, Venus in Taurus means that, so on. But it's, but you have to be able to let that go to allow something of that, the presence of that archetype to be known.
I think that's really where the complexity of meaning starts to unfold, is when we can move beyond sort of the cookbook definitions that you're naming, that so many of us learn when we're new to astrology. And as you were speaking, this has been a kind of a debate in the astrological community and beyond for a while. I'm curious what your thoughts are about this. Do you think that there's a divinatory aspect to astrological practice? You were naming that you don't believe we can take the astrologer out of astrology. We lose something really fundamental and really important if we do that. So I'd be curious your thoughts about, is there kind of a divinatory, or perhaps there's another word, element to it that's fundamental, that's really important?
Such a big question, and it's something I pondered a lot over the years, and this whole question of what is divination also. I think we are divining, because something, I think if we allow something to speak through the chart, that the chart is a kind of medium for some kind of other than human communication, potentially, then I think we're in some kind of divinatory experience. So I think there is an aspect of divination. I don't think we can, I certainly don't think, I don't work with the idea that the planets are causing things to happen. So I definitely reject the causative model of astrology. I don't think that when Jupiter is in a particular part of the sky, it is causing us to expand our thinking or broaden our worldview. It's not, I don't see it in that way. But there's something that there's something in the in the power within a paradigm of synchronicity that makes it look like that somehow.
That could be a whole episode, I think, John, this sort of fate versus free will conversation about astrology, the fatalistic, deterministic versus it's just a series of synchronicities or energetic movements or currents that we then have autonomy around how we utilize or respond to. So,
I mean, Jung said that, that every moment carries a particular quality to it. The quality, that's the quality of that moment. But he also later in his life acknowledged that, and in a way saying this thing that you can't take the astrologer out of the astrology, he when he was doing his own astrological research, he was trying to prove astrology basically he was doing the test with pairs of married couples, and he was getting these amazing results. But then he realized because he was trying to move with the material, with the data, to see if it worked in different ways, and he realized that what was happening was that his own desire and his passion for this topic and his desire to see the correlations was actually influencing what he was seeing. So, and he called it a secret. he said it's as if there's a secret mutual connivance between the astrologer and the material, which is really like, whoa. You know, like there's some, which for me is magical. You know, it's not in any way to undermine the efficacy of astrology. In some ways, I think it enhances it, that there is actually a communication going on between the astrologer and the material that's being presented, that you can't empty that out and turn it into some kind of system, because you destroy the very thing that makes it meaningful. So in that context, I think we are talking about some form of divinatory activity that we're involved in. Yeah. Well, we've gone straight into the big stuff straight away.
We have. It wasn't on the list today. It's just where the currents pulled us. So yeah,
Good
beautiful.
question.
Yeah. I'd love to go back in time here while we're chatting today and hear a little more about how you eventually came to the decision to become a full-time professional astrologer. And then as part of that journey, what were some of your early client experiences like?
Yeah.
Did you feel confident right away? Was there a sense of questioning the choice at points, or were you always just, you knew that it was right?
Yeah.
And what did that, I know a lot of folks who study astrology and who are interested in astrology probably think about or dream about doing it full time. And so what did that journey look like for you? How long did that take? And what were some of the important steps along the way?
I mean, it was it was such a life change for me. And I was studying to become a chartered surveyor, like an estate surveyor at university. I was following my dad's path, and I mean, I was so, and I look at it now, I think, well, I was so far off my path at that point, because I was really unhappy. I didn't enjoy it. Really, I was just, I hadn't found my passion. And then suddenly I found my passion all of a sudden. And it's so out there. It's so like, out on the margins of society. And so nobody around me understood what on earth had happened to me. I didn't have anyone in my life, perhaps apart from this guy, but we didn't become friends or anything. So, it was like, I just literally had to go out and find a completely new community, which is what I did. I started going to camps. I went to astrology camps. They were great. You'd sort of spend 5 days in the field camping. I met these amazing people. I met astrologers for the first time. So I literally had to go out and do this and meet people. And I found a local course in the town I was living in at the time. And I just read books. And then within a couple of years, maybe 2 to 3 years, because I started doing it for friends. I started, I wanted to know everybody's birth details straight away. I became, I was passionate about it, and I just started doing it. And then eventually I got to the point I thought, well, I'm going to charge for this session. And I think I was 24 when that happened. Yeah. And of course I was mostly, because I was young, right? I was mostly doing charts people who were way older. I was talking about the Saturn return, something I've never experienced with people who'd been through that. So that was interesting. And it's I have some students that age. In fact, one particular student comes to mind who is that kind of age, going, I'm so young, can I do this? Well, I said, well, from my experience, yeah, you can. And I think astrologers are getting younger and younger too. But it was a big thing to start charging for it, but it was a kind of natural thing too that happened. And and I kind of just built it up through word of mouth from there, I guess. Took a while. But I was, I knew that's what I wanted to do. It was clear to me, even though I really didn't know what it meant. I mean, the first time I told anybody I was an astrologer, I think she said to me, that's not something you can be. What does that
Turns
mean?
out it is. It is something you can be.
That's not a job. It's not a career, right? This is the 90s. I mean, things were a bit different back then. I think it's, astrology is experiencing such a surge of popularity now, isn't it? I mean, online, of course, it's huge. There's so many people now following this path. But back then it wasn't so much. It was really a, it was a very different world. Yeah.
You mentioned earlier that you're largely self-taught. You did a lot of your own research and reading and learning. And have there been elders in the astrology community that have inspired your work, or that you've had a chance to train and study with in your time
Yeah.
as an astrologer?
Yeah, there have. There've been. I mean, I studied with with Bruno and Louisa Huber, who were very inspiring. So they were mentors for a while. I mean, I've been to, so many talks, and in those early days, I went to talks with Noel Till, Alan Oaken, Liz
Have you
Green.
worked with Melanie? Melanie's based there, isn't she? Melanie Reinhardt.
I knew Melanie well. In fact, I wrote my book Your Zodiac Soul in 2017 in Melanie's house in Bali. So that was really special, because her book was one of that pile that I bought back in that first big pile of books I bought. That was one of them, and that Chiron book was seminal for me in a lot of ways. We talked about my Aries. I mean, I have a Sun Chiron conjunction in Aries, so that really spoke to me. And Chiron is I was at one of those astrology camps that I went to, and someone introduced me to Chiron, and it had such an impact on me. Yeah, like, wow. And he showed me that because I hadn't put Chiron in a chart at that point, and then I saw it and was like, that's you're going to work with Chiron a lot, which is definitely what's happened. I think my approach to astrology, which has a very Chironic theme to it. The astrodrama work it's real medicine work,
Absolutely. So what occupies your time these days, here over 2 decades into your time as an astrologer? You've written a book that you mentioned earlier. Are you still seeing clients? I know you teach a lot. What's kind of the focus of your practice and your work right now?
Well, I mean, I started the Kairos School of Astrology back in 2011. And that was been based around a 2-year training. So taking people through from foundation level through diploma level. So, and I'm very much in I teach people all the techniques in the first year, and broadly a kind of psychological astrology. That's my main approach. I bring elements of evolutionary astrology as well, and some traditional as well. But then the second year is all about how we apply that. So I'm really interested in what happens in a consultation, and how we actually apply all those techniques in real life situations. So I base my second year program around that. So each module is based around a theme, like vocation, relationships, family, money, health, karma. These are the main themes we work with. And I'm really interested in talking about astrological practice. I mean, that's part of the inspiration for us doing this podcast, is because I really want to talk about what happens in the practice of astrology, beyond the techniques. The techniques are necessary. We need those to understand what we're looking at, but actually there's something else that's going on in the practice. And I often say to my students, and when they're about to go out and start their own practice, I'll say, this is a practice like any other practice, like a meditation practice, it's something that you're doing. It's something that you're integrating into your life. And I think, as an astrologer, it is something you can't you don't really switch it off. It's not like you go and do your job in the day, you come back and when you go, it's like, it's a way of life in a way. It's a way of thinking. It's a philosophy, it's a mindset.
Yeah, I would agree completely, John. I think that when we for me, it's been sort of a process of surrender and just allowing it to constantly be in my field and in my awareness. It never turns off. I'm at the grocery store and I'm noticing how someone's interacting, and my astrologer intuition starts going, gosh, that sounds like Capricorn. I wonder, and just the curiosity, or just noticing the ebbs and flows of the planetary currents, and being aware of those and letting those kind of inform my life and my process. So no, I'm in complete agreement that it never turns off. Once we drink the astrologer Kool-Aid,
it's there.
It's a practice.
It's a proper vocation in that sense. It's a calling. I think it calls certain people, and it's not something you can switch on and off. Yeah, I mean, you ask what else I occupies my time. Well, I have my own practice, of course. I see clients in person in Glastonbury, and also increasingly online, of course. And I also run retreats, and when I do the embodied retreats, the Astrodrama retreats, I think that's still my favorite thing to do. That's the thing I find the most fulfillment in. It's extraordinary. I have a whole astrological mask theater. I got a whole costume wardrobe. It's just here right next to me. It's like all my costumes and masks and all of that I bring out, and that's a big part of it. You know, how we enter into the theater of astrology. I do see it as theater. You know, I see astrology as a kind of theater of the soul. Yeah.
I love that. You and I share that passion and that connection with the performative and storytelling aspect of mythology, of astrology, of archetypes. So we'll definitely be getting more into some of that in future conversations, which is very exciting. Yeah. What do you have coming up, John? We're speaking in February of 2023. I know you've got some offerings on the schedule. You're going to be talking about astrocartography. You have a Chiron teaching coming up. What are you excited about that you've got?
Yeah, excited about the 2 courses I'm running in March. A 3-week course on astrocartography, which I find fascinating. This idea that that there are these latent aspects of our character that kind of laid out around the world, that if we visit certain places, certain parts of that character come to the fore more. And I find that really interesting. I've got so many examples in my own life of having traveled a lot to different parts of the world and how it just shines. It's extraordinary, that you go to the place where the sun was rising when you were born, or where Mars was culminating, or where Venus was setting. And these places carry a certain charge. Because, when you've got a planet, when you're born with a planet on an angle, that planet really leads you, becomes a leading player in your life. And so when you travel to those places, relocate the chart, you relocate your birth chart as well for that place, see a planet like riding on an angle like that, you can see how that planet comes more into play in your life. So we've got a 3-week course on that, got lots of nice examples. And
that starts March 7th, is that right? And it runs you said 3 weeks.
Yeah, 3 weeks.
Yeah.
And there'll be lots of chance for people to look at their own charts, and we'll be able to do lots of examples from people who are in the group.
You're offering that folks can do that wherever in the world they are,
yeah,
right? It's online.
It's online.
Right.
And then the Chiron, I'm doing a 4-hour webinar on Chiron. Again, got some new material on Chiron, some new research that I'm going to be sharing. And again, opportunity for people to look at their own Chiron positions. That's called the Chiron Experience. And that's timed for the Jupiter-Chiron conjunction on the 12th of March, which I'm excited about. The conjunct in Aries, and what a time to open up that exploration of those deep places of the wound. That Chiron is. So yeah, I've also got a new foundation course starting in April, which is my first year of the training, and then I got a new diploma course starting in May as well. It's the second year.
Busy spring for you, John. That's really exciting.
Very busy. Yeah. I'm also doing a course on the nodes in April as well in Glastonbury. There's a talk that I'm giving as well as part of that, which will be live streamed on the 21st of April. So yeah, quite a lot going on.
Exciting. Well, congratulations on being busy and productive and creative. I think that's most people's dream. So it's wonderful to be connecting with you, and I can feel just all this energy and inspiration that you're bringing to this work. And it's been really fun chatting with you.
Really good.
Is there anything else about kind of your background, your story that we didn't get to today that you want to mention?
Yeah, probably. I mean, I'm sure there's a lot. I mean, it's funny when you tell the story, you always pull out different aspects of it, but it's it's been quite a ride, and it's still, I mean, I'm in Aries, I get bored easily, and yet here I am 30 years on, still doing the same thing. So there must be something about astrology that's caught a hold of me. I think it grabs hold of your soul.
I think it does. And I think the ever-changing nature of the sky and the alignments, no 2 days are the same astrologically. It's always changing. And those outer transpersonal planets move so slowly. It's, we'll never be alive for Pluto in a certain sign. So there's just not, in this form, in this body per se. But it's fascinating to notice how we can watch the moon move through the entire zodiac in the course of 28 days. But Pluto, Uranus will only experience it in so many signs over the course of our lifetime. So it's beautiful to be in tune with these patterns, and it doesn't get boring. It really doesn't. So yeah, I love that. I love that, John. Well, there'll be more of this to come. We're going to be meeting regularly to talk about all things astrological and learn more about you, John, and your work. And yeah, excited to dive into more material.
Right.
Thanks for, yeah, me too. Thanks for talking today. Great conversation.
Great.
And welcome, listeners. We're excited to have you, and we look forward to sharing more with you in the weeks to come.
You can find out more about John's work at www.kairosastrology.co.uk.